Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Ryan Adams, and along with my co-counsel, James Carter, we represent the state in the matter. Today, we heard a tragic story of Tamara Alexander, a story of a young life cut short. On July 19th, Megan Eigenbrot and Tamara Eigenbrot laid down for the night. At around 9:30, we heard Megan started to go to sleep, but she wasn't able to sleep all night. The reason why she was unable to sleep all night was because suddenly she heard a crash around 2 a.m. She heard glass breaking in the back bedroom. She woke up. And as she awoke, another crash happened in front of her in her bedroom window. What she saw would shock her for the rest of her life. She saw a glass bottle filled with fire careening through her window. At first, she thought it was a nightmare. Can't believe that she was under attack by fire. But when the fire alarms began to ring, she knew this wasn't a dream. The fire caught the drapes. It climbed up the wall and spread throughout the house. So Megan did what any mother would do. She ran to her daughter's aid. When she arrived to the room, she was greeted by a closed door. She begged, screamed, kicked, clawed to wake her daughter and get to her daughter, but she was unable to do it. Soon the smoke and the flames began to overwhelm her. She's panicking, coughing, but she then leaves her daughter behind. When she gets outside, she calls 911. A police officer arrives on the scene to see a lady screaming for help to save her daughter. They both try to enter the house, but again, the flames and the smoke were too great. As a grieving mother watches her house, her home, and her world burn down, only one thing went through her mind: the fear of the defendant, the fear of the defendant's wrath and rage in harming her. That night, Tamara Eigenbrot died. That night as well, the detective, Dillinger, did an investigation. Searching the area after being heard that Josh Wallace may have been in the area and the cause of this fire, she searched the area and found Josh Wallace walking down Dale Earnhardt Boulevard. Josh Wallace was approached by Officer Dillinger, and the officer noted a distinct smell of gasoline and alcohol. When searched on his person, he found a lighter and two steel reserve cans of beer. Dillinger asked the defendant if he would come to the station to answer questions. He complied hesitantly. When we went to the station, Dillinger asked if he was in the military, and then he immediately replied, "I know nothing of firebombs. I don't know anything about bombs," before he even heard of the cause of the fire. The investigation by Dillinger continued the next day. The investigation turned up that the defendant used to live at a home down the street at 918 Spring Street. At that old home, within the crawl space, they found a gasoline can. Behind that home, there was a path that led to Dale Earnhardt Boulevard through the woods, where the defendant was found on the night of the fire. And yet, amongst all of that, the counsel will have you believe that this was just coincidence. However, ladies and gentlemen, one piece of evidence may be coincidence. Two pieces of evidence may be coincidence. When you have 3, 4, and 5, 6, and more pieces of evidence, it only points to one thing, one person, Josh Wallace, and that thing, and Josh Wallace, the defendant, is guilty. So the day before, we have testimony from Megan as well, that the defendant was the last person to threaten her. We have testimony from Megan Eigenbrot that the defendant wanted his stuff out of the house the night of the fire. We have evidence that at the old home that he used to live in, there was a gas can in the crawl space in an abandoned home. We have evidence that the path behind that house contained glass, in which was part of the bomb that was thrown through Megan's window. We have evidence that at that home there was gas found in the grass, and that gasoline was the accelerant used within those bottles. We also have evidence that Josh was found in the location a mere 42 minutes after the phone call. The defense will have you believe that he wasn't in the area. It's impossible to be at two places at once. They've offered a cell phone expert who admits in his own affidavit that it's impossible to tell the exact location of a person, but then claims that he knows where the defendant is. And when questioned about a ping that happens at 1406, he says cell phone network load will shift the phone call, but offers nothing to show how that network load was that night. So ask yourself, just like my co-counsel asked you earlier, what do they stand to gain? Why would they hire someone to lie for them? Again, one piece of evidence can be a coincidence. Two pieces of evidence can be a coincidence. When you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and more pieces of evidence, it is no longer a coincidence. It points to one man, and that one man, Josh Wallace, is guilty. What we have to show here today is that the defendant is guilty of murder by the means of arson. Now, this jurisdiction defines murder as the purposeful and deliberate killing of another person by the means of arson or the use of a deadly weapon. And arson is defined as the burning of a dwelling while someone else is inside. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, all we have to show is that the defendant purposefully and willfully burned the home of Megan Eichenbrod. And though he did not mean for Tamara to die, she did. And the fire he caused led to her death. Now, we have to show that he's guilty of murder by arson beyond a reasonable doubt. Guilty of murder by arson beyond a reasonable doubt. However, it's not beyond all doubt. It's not beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's not a doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a doubt that's based on speculation, coincidence, guesses. It's a doubt that is truly founded in reason. And we have met that burden today. Again, ladies and gentlemen, all the evidence provided points to one person, Josh Wallace. Josh Wallace was found in the area. Josh Wallace threw bottles through the window. Josh Wallace burned the home of Megan Eichenbrod. And Josh Wallace killed Tamara Eichenbrod. So you have the burden today now to do the only thing the evidence allows. Find the defendant guilty of murder by arson. Thank you.
Defense?
Beg the court's indulgence. May it please the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a horrible case. Like Detective Dillinger told you, this is one of the most difficult cases, these types of cases, involving the death of a teenage girl. These are the most difficult cases that I deal with in my career as a lawyer. We can all agree here today that what happened to Tammy Eichenbrod, I agree, the state agrees, I know you agree. It was an awful crime. But it would also be a horrible crime to send the defendant, Josh Wallace, to jail for a crime that he did not commit. And we Josh Wallace did not commit that crime? Because the state today has built a case entirely on assumptions. Assumptions that are not supported by any evidence. Assumptions that rely on the easiest and most convenient explanations. And assumptions that fail to answer that one question. How can a person be two places at the same time? And ladies and gentlemen, what happens when you take one assumption and stack it on top of another assumption, and stack it on top of another assumption, and stack it on top of another assumption, and assume them as fact? An innocent man goes to jail. Now, what is the crime that the state has assumed Josh has committed here today? They've charged him with arson and murder in the first degree. Now, what does that mean? That means that you have to have a killing committed during the burning of a dwelling house that was occupied at that time. Nobody doubts that we have it. But the state has presented no evidence to you that Josh is the person who committed that crime. And they have the burden to prove that crime to you. They have the burden. And that burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest burden that is placed on a party in our justice system. Now, I can understand. You might wonder, well, that's great. Beyond a reasonable doubt, it's the highest burden. But what does that mean? Well, normally, when I give this little spiel, I have an explanation for you as jurors. I tell the jurors, after you've looked at all the evidence that's been presented. But in this case, I might tell you to look at all the evidence that hasn't been presented. But after this trial's over, you look at all the evidence that the state thinks they've presented or that they haven't presented. The other side gives their argument, I give my argument. The judge instructs you on the law. You go back in that jury room, and it's time to deliberate. You finally get to talk about this case. You're sitting around that table, and you ask yourself, did Josh commit this crime? And ladies and gentlemen, if the answer is, well, Josh may have committed this crime, the state has not met their burden of proof. If your answer is, well, I think Josh committed this crime, then the state has not met their burden of proof. Even if you say to yourself, well, Josh probably committed this crime. Even then, the state has not met their burden of proof. You must know that Josh Wallace is the one who threw that firebomb, that Molotov cocktail. And ladies and gentlemen, the state has presented no evidence that shows that here today. But let's talk about the evidence that's been presented. The state tells you that they have presented 10 pieces of evidence today. Ladies and gentlemen, the only evidence that I've seen presented here today is right here. 2. And what does that evidence say? We've got a house with bedrooms and a dog. Nobody disputes that. We've got cell phone records. Shows Josh used a cell phone. And these cell phone records actually show you evidence that we presented to you. Evidence that shows there is no way Josh Wallace could have traveled the distance of over 1 mile, at the very least 1 mile, in 2 minutes. It's not possible. Not to mention, you heard from Robert Saunders here today. Didn't have anything to gain by being here today. And he told you at 2 a.m., after the 911 call was made, he was at the Three Monkeys with Josh, trying to help him get a job. Ladies and gentlemen, we didn't have to present any evidence to you here today. But we have presented evidence to you, an eyewitness, and hard, self-thumbed records that show you Josh Wallace is innocent. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here today as jurors. It's my opinion that next to serving our armed forces, that this is one of the highest civic duties that you can perform in your role as a citizen of our great country. Because when the state accuses Josh Wallace of a crime that he didn't commit, when the state bases an entire case on presumptions, and Josh Wallace asks the question, how can I have been in two places at one time? He has you to answer that question. Ladies and gentlemen, look at the evidence that's been presented. Dig down, deep in your heart. Set aside the sympathies that we all feel for Tammy Knight, and ask yourself that one. Ladies and gentlemen, my mom always told me what happened when you assume. And I know it's not good. But in this case, what happens when you assume is that an innocent man goes to jail. Thank you.
Any rebuttal?
I'll probably take that last line out.
I love it.
Yeah, Sonny, you and me. I forgot to.
Any rebuttal?
Oh, I didn't.
I actually think, I like it, I think it's,
That little
It's
line.
like it's very serious and that's funny, and I don't know.
no, I think it plays.
We also left the armed forces.
Yeah. Why is that? That's not funny, I mean.
Continue.
I was thinking voting.
Normally I would say like police officer. Sorry.
Again, when you have one piece of evidence, 2, 3 more pieces of evidence, it points to one thing, guilt. Now, the defense says we haven't offered any evidence, as if the testimony and what the actions of the detective magically disappeared, evaporated. And then they want to say that all the stuff that we've said, the evidence that we've presented through testimony is gone, and it's just based on assumptions. So let's take a look at those assumptions. They assume that it's irrelevant that Josh Wallace was in the area. They assume that it's irrelevant that the home that Josh Wallace used to live at is down the street from Megan Ironwood, and they assume that's irrelevant. They also assume that he is there. He wasn't there that night. He was at the Three Monkeys bar, because the eyewitness that they said and brought and presented today came 3 months after the incident. If he was so concerned about the safety and well-being of the defendant, why did he wait 3 months? Ask yourselves that question. But we have met our burden. Our burden is difficult, but we have met it. Again, we've heard from the victim, the one who lost her child at the time of the fire. Who is she scared of? Josh Wallace. Who was the last person to threaten her? Josh Wallace. Who wanted his documents out of the house that night before the fire? Josh Wallace. These aren't assumptions, ladies and gentlemen. These are facts. And the fact is that Josh Wallace burned the house of Tamara and Megan Eigenbrot, and the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of murder by the means of arson.